The muzzle flash lit up the hospital corridor like lightning. Screams echoed through Walter Reed's halls. 3 armed terrorists had turned the military hospital into a war zone. But they made one critical mistake. They assumed the gray-haired security guard was just another target. They had no idea they'd just walked into the domain of a man who'd spent 20 years making the impossible possible. Welcome to Depths of Human Soul. Before we dive into this intense story of hidden heroism, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who look like prey. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center stood like a fortress of healing in Bethesda, Maryland. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it served as sanctuary for America's wounded warriors. Inside its sterile corridors, miracles happened daily. Shattered soldiers rebuilt their lives, families reunited, and hope was restored one patient at a time. Robert "Bob" Harrison had been part of that healing mission for 12 years, though most people barely noticed him. At 62, he was the kind of security guard who blended into the background. Gray hair, always neat under his black security cap, uniform pressed but not flashy, radio clipped to his shoulder. He looked exactly like what everyone expected. A retired guy who needed the health benefits and liked the steady paycheck. He worked the evening shift, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., walking the same routes he'd memorized years ago. Past the ICU where machines kept heroes breathing. Through the rehabilitation wing where amputees learned to walk again. Around the family waiting areas where parents prayed for their sons and daughters to come home whole. Bob never complained about the walking, never grumbled about difficult visitors or crying children. He just moved through his rounds with quiet efficiency, checking doors, monitoring cameras, making sure everyone stayed safe. The nurses knew him by name, but not much else. The doctors acknowledged him with polite nods. To them, he was reliable, invisible, and completely unremarkable. If they'd looked closer, they might have noticed a few things. The way he always positioned himself with clear sight lines to exits. How his eyes constantly scanned crowds for anomalies. The way he could spot trouble 3 conversations before it started. But in a hospital full of medical emergencies and life-or-death decisions, nobody paid attention to the quiet man with the radio. That would change on November 15th. Tuesday nights at Walter Reed were typically calm. Most scheduled surgeries happened during day shifts, and the evening brought a peaceful transition from the organized chaos of daytime medicine to the quieter vigilance of overnight care. Bob had started his shift at 3 p.m. as always, checking in with the day security team and reviewing the incident log. Nothing unusual. A confused patient who'd wandered from his room, a heated argument between family members over visiting hours, a broken vending machine that had frustrated hungry visitors. Standard hospital fare. By 7 p.m., the corridors had settled into their evening rhythm. Dinner service was winding down. Visiting hours would end at 9, and the building would soon quiet to its overnight hum. Bob made his rounds methodically, same as always. Past the main lobby, through the east wing where surgery patients recovered, along the administrative corridors that emptied after business hours. But something felt different tonight. It started with small things. 2 men in civilian clothes loitering near the parking garage entrance longer than typical visitors. A van parked in the short-term lot, but with no one coming or going from it. Phone conversations that stopped abruptly when he passed by. Bob's instincts, dormant for over a decade, began to stir. At 8:30 p.m., he noticed one of the loitering men had moved inside. The guy was trying to look casual, checking his phone and studying the directory near the elevators, but his body language was all wrong. Too alert, too focused, the kind of awareness that came from tactical training, not medical anxiety. Bob keyed his radio. "Control, this is Harrison. I've got a possible situation developing near the main lobby, requesting supervisor contact." The response was immediate but dismissive. "Copy that, Bob. What's the nature of the situation?" "Suspicious individuals, behavior patterns inconsistent with normal visitor activity." There was a pause. "Are they violating any hospital policies?" Bob watched the man near the elevator. Still there, still too alert. "Negative. Just something's not right. Keep monitoring. Let us know if they do anything actionable." Bob understood. He was the night security guard with 12 years of nothing happening. His supervisors trusted him to handle drunk family members and lost visitors, not to identify sophisticated threats. They didn't know what he used to do. They didn't know who he used to be. At 9:15 p.m., visiting hours ended and most civilians filtered out through the main exits. But the alert man didn't leave. Instead, he was joined by two others. They moved with the same measured precision, the same tactical awareness. Bob's training kicked in fully now. He began what his old unit would have called battlefield assessment. 3 subjects, all military-age males, moving with coordinated purpose through a soft target environment. No visible weapons, but that meant nothing. If these men were what his instincts said they were, they'd be carrying. He needed to get closer. The lobby of Walter Reed had been transformed into a battlefield. Overturned furniture created impromptu barriers where staff and visitors huddled in terror. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows that flickered with each muzzle flash. The air smelled of gunpowder and fear. The 3 attackers had positioned themselves with tactical precision. One near the main entrance, controlling ingress and egress. One at the central security desk, accessing building systems and communication networks. The third moving between the elevator banks, ensuring no one reached the upper floors where the most sensitive patients were housed. Bob observed them for 30 seconds, mentally cataloging their equipment and capabilities. M4 carbines, professionally modified, body armor under civilian jackets, communication headsets suggesting command coordination, night vision capabilities. These men were professionals, not fanatics. The lead attacker was speaking into his headset. Perimeter secured. Beginning Phase 2. Targets are located on floors 3 and 7, according to the intelligence package. Bob's assessment crystallized. This was an assassination mission targeting specific patients. The lobby takeover was just the opening move. He needed to stop them before they reached the upper floors. Bob moved along the wall, using the architectural features he'd memorized during 12 years of routine patrols. Behind the information desk, through the gift shop, emerging near the east corridor where he had a clear flanking position on the nearest attacker. The terrorist was focused on the elevators, his rifle trained on the small crowd of staff members he'd herded into a corner. His back was to Bob's position. Classic tactical error, fixation on the primary objective while losing situational awareness. Bob closed the distance in 12 seconds. The takedown was silent and efficient. Arm around the throat, cutting off both air and blood flow to the brain. The rifle clattered to the floor as the man's hands instinctively reached for his neck. Bob controlled the fall, lowering the unconscious terrorist quietly behind the elevator bank. 1 down, 2 to go. The second attacker noticed his partner's absence within 15 seconds. Alpha 2, report your status. No response. Alpha 2, do you copy? The lead terrorist made hand signals to his remaining partner. They were adapting, recognizing that their tactical situation had changed. Someone was hunting them. Bob smiled grimly. After 12 years of checking locks and soothing worried families, he was home. The remaining 2 terrorists were good. Bob had to give them credit. Instead of panicking when their teammate went silent, they immediately shifted to counter-assault mode. One moved to high ground at the top of the lobby's curved staircase, establishing overwatch. The other began a systematic sweep of the ground floor, checking every position where a threat could hide. Bob watched them work from his concealed position behind the fallen elevator bank. These men had training, military or intelligence background, probably foreign special operations. Their coordination was seamless, their tactical discipline impressive. But they had one critical disadvantage. They were operating in Bob's house. For 12 years, he'd walked every corridor of this hospital. He knew which hallways connected to which wings, where the service passages ran, which doors led to dead ends, and which opened onto multiple escape routes. He'd memorized the sight lines from every room, the blind spots near every corner, the acoustic properties of each section. They knew the layout from blueprints and reconnaissance. He knew it from living here. Bob began to move. Using the service corridor behind the pharmacy, he emerged on the opposite side of the lobby from where the sweeping terrorist expected threats to appear. The man was checking methodically, but predictably, clearing each area once and then moving on. He didn't expect his prey to double back through cleared zones. Bob waited until the terrorist passed his position, then followed at a distance. The man was good, checking corners, maintaining fields of fire, communicating with his overwatch partner through hand signals. But he was hunting someone who had perfected the art of being invisible. The opportunity came near the gift shop. The terrorist paused to check the small retail space, momentarily breaking visual contact with his overwatch partner. Bob moved like smoke, closing the distance while the man's attention was focused on the darkened shop interior. The second takedown was even quieter than the first. Bob disabled the man's radio first, then applied a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in 4 seconds. He dragged the limp form behind the gift shop counter and secured his weapons. 2 down, 1 to go, but the last one was the most dangerous. The lead terrorist realized he was alone when his sweep partner failed to emerge from the gift shop area. Bob could see the man's tactical mind working, processing the implications. 2 trained operators eliminated silently by an unknown threat. This wasn't a lucky security guard or brave civilian. This was a professional. The terrorist made the smart choice. He consolidated his position at the top of the curved staircase and began calling for extraction. Command, this is Alpha 1. Mission is compromised. I say again, mission is compromised. Requesting immediate extraction. 2 operators down. Unknown threat active. Bob couldn't hear the response, but he could read the man's body language. No immediate extraction available. The terrorist was on his own until backup could arrive, which meant Bob had a window of opportunity, but not a large one. The staircase position was nearly perfect defensively. High ground, clear fields of fire in all directions, only 2 approaches and both easily covered. The terrorist had an M4 carbine with what looked like at least 90 rounds of ammunition remaining. He'd positioned himself behind the thick marble railing, providing excellent cover while maintaining visual dominance of the lobby. A direct assault would be suicide. But Bob hadn't survived 20 years of Delta operations by making direct assaults on prepared positions. He disappeared into the hospital's service areas, moving through maintenance corridors and utility spaces that didn't appear on any tactical blueprint. Walter Reed was a massive complex, built in sections over several decades. The original building connected to newer wings through a maze of passages designed for equipment transport and emergency access. Bob knew them all. 15 minutes later, he emerged through a service door on the second floor, directly above the terrorist's position. The curved staircase that provided such excellent defensive advantages from below created a significant blind spot from above. Bob looked down through the decorative railing at his target. The man was scanning the lobby below, weapon ready, every muscle tense with combat alertness. Professional focus, but focused in the wrong direction. Bob drew the tactical knife he'd carried for 30 years, never removed from his belt even during 12 years of peaceful security work. Some habits die hard. The terrorist never heard him coming. The lobby of Walter Reed fell silent except for the quiet sobbing of terrified staff and visitors. Emergency lights continued to flicker, casting surreal shadows over the scene of chaos that had erupted and ended in less than 20 minutes. Bob stood at the top of the curved staircase, looking down at the 3 unconscious terrorists zip-tied with their own restraints. All were breathing. All would survive to face interrogation. He'd used non-lethal force throughout the engagement. This was a hospital, a place of healing, and he wouldn't bring unnecessary death here if it could be avoided. His radio crackled back to life as he turned it on. Harrison, respond. What's your status? Control, this is Harrison. 3 suspects neutralized. Lobby is secure. Medical personnel can resume normal operations. There was a long pause. Harrison, did you say neutralized? Affirmative. All 3 subjects are unconscious and restrained. Weapons secured. Area is safe for first responders. When the FBI tactical team arrived 12 minutes later, they found a scene that would be discussed in law enforcement training seminars for years to come. 3 professional terrorists, heavily armed and tactically trained, taken down by a single man without a single shot fired. Agent Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, approached Bob with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you some questions about what happened here tonight. Bob nodded calmly. Of course. These men are preliminary identified as Tier 1 operatives from a foreign intelligence service. They had detailed intelligence about hospital layout, patient locations, and security protocols. They were here to eliminate specific high-value targets currently receiving treatment. I see. Mr. Harrison, ... Agent Chen consulted her tablet. Your employment record shows 12 years as a security guard here, prior service listed as Army Infantry. But what I'm looking at in this lobby, this isn't something an infantry veteran learns in basic training. Bob met her gaze steadily. Ma'am, I did what needed to be done to protect the patients and staff of this facility. I'm sure you did. But I need to understand how a 62-year-old security guard single-handedly neutralized 3 foreign special operations personnel. Bob was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. For 12 years, he'd maintained operational security about his true background. For 12 years, he'd been just Bob the security guard, invisible and unremarkable. That cover was blown now. Agent Chen, I believe you'll need to make some phone calls to get the full picture of my service record. My clearance level is probably above your current authorization." Chen's eyes widened slightly. "What exactly are you telling me, Mr. Harrison?" "I'm telling you that some files are kept in very special places, and some soldiers never really retire. They just find quieter places to serve." 3 hours later, Agent Chen sat in the hospital administrator's office with a stack of classified documents that had taken 6 different authorization codes to access. Bob sat across from her, still in his security uniform, but somehow looking different now. The invisible man had become visible, and what she saw was formidable. "Sergeant Major Robert Harrison," she read aloud. "Delta Force, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, 22 years of service, operations classified under Special Access Programs." She looked up. "The redacted sections in this file are extensive." Bob nodded. "Most of what I did wasn't the kind of thing that makes it into official histories. But what I can read." Chen flipped through pages. Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, and about a dozen countries that are just listed as location redacted. You were involved in some of the most sensitive counterterrorism operations of the past 3 decades. I went where I was needed. And then, in 2011, you just retired? Became a hospital security guard?" Bob was quiet for a moment, thinking about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to her to find peace. "Agent Chen, after 22 years of taking lives, I wanted to spend some time protecting them instead. This hospital seemed like a good place to do that." "Did your supervisors know about your background?" "No, ma'am. That wasn't necessary. I was hired to check doors and monitor cameras, not to engage hostile forces." Chen closed the file. "Mr. Harrison, the 3 men you captured tonight have been linked to at least 6 international incidents. They're among the most wanted operatives in the intelligence community. Taking them alive will provide invaluable intelligence about ongoing threats. I'm glad they'll be useful. What you did tonight, it was extraordinary. But I have to ask, are you planning to continue working security here?" Bob smiled slightly. "Ma'am, I've been protecting this hospital for 12 years. I plan to keep protecting it for as long as they'll let me." "Even though your cover is blown? Even though people will know who you really are now?" Bob looked out the window at the pre-dawn sky. In a few hours, the day shift would arrive. Nurses would check on patients, doctors would make rounds, families would visit their loved ones. The healing mission of Walter Reed would continue, same as always. "Agent Chen, those people don't need to know what I used to do. They just need to know that someone's watching over them while they sleep." Word of the incident spread through Walter Reed like wildfire, though the official story was carefully controlled. "Security incident resolved by staff intervention," was all the press release said. But inside the hospital, everyone knew something extraordinary had happened. Bob returned to work the following Tuesday. Same shift, same uniform, same quiet demeanor. But the atmosphere had changed subtly. Nurses who had barely acknowledged him for 12 years now nodded with something approaching reverence. Doctors stopped to shake his hand. The administrative staff treated him with the kind of respect usually reserved for medical directors. Bob tried to maintain his usual invisible routine, but it was impossible. His supervisor, Mark Rodriguez, pulled him aside after his first shift back. "Bob, I've been managing security for this hospital for 8 years. In all that time, you never once mentioned your military background beyond Army infantry. Didn't seem relevant to checking locks and monitoring cameras." Mark laughed, but it wasn't entirely comfortable. Bob, the FBI agent who debriefed me, said I've been employing someone who could probably run security for the Pentagon. She suggested I might want to expand your responsibilities. I'm happy with my current duties, Mark. I know you are. But Bob, after what happened, after what you did, we can't just pretend you're an ordinary security guard anymore. Bob understood the dilemma. His actions had saved lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic incident. But they had also revealed capabilities that didn't fit the quiet role he'd maintained for over a decade. What are you suggesting? The hospital board wants to create a new position, Director of Tactical Security. It would involve threat assessment, emergency protocol development, liaison with federal agencies. The pay would be substantially better, and you'd have a team to supervise. Bob considered the offer. More responsibility, more visibility, more recognition. Everything he'd avoided by taking the simple security guard position 12 years ago. Mark, I appreciate the offer, but I like walking the halls at night. I like checking on patients, making sure families feel safe. I don't need a fancy title or a bigger paycheck. But however, Bob continued, if the hospital wants my advice on security improvements, if you want me to help train other guards on threat recognition, if there are specific situations where my experience might be useful, I'm willing to help, as long as I can keep doing what I've been doing. Mark nodded slowly. You want to stay invisible? I want to stay useful. 6 months later, Bob was making his evening rounds when he encountered a young Marine corporal visiting his wounded squad leader. The Marine was agitated, pacing in the family waiting area, clearly struggling with something. Bob approached quietly. Everything all right, son? The Marine looked up, recognizing the security uniform. Yeah, my sergeant got hit by an IED 3 days ago, lost his leg. He's always been the toughest guy I know, and now he's talking about how he's useless, how his military career is over. Bob nodded. What's your name, Marine? Corporal Davies, sir. Well, Corporal Davies, your sergeant is probably feeling like his identity got blown up along with his leg. When you've defined yourself by what your body can do, losing part of it feels like losing everything. Yes, sir, that's exactly what he said. Bob was quiet for a moment. You know what you should tell him? What's that? That being a warrior isn't about having all your original parts. It's about having the warrior's heart, and that doesn't get amputated. Davies looked at the older security guard with new attention. You sound like you've been there. Different war, same feelings. Tell your sergeant that retirement isn't the end of service. It's just the beginning of a different kind of service. There are a lot of ways to protect people that don't involve carrying a rifle. I'll tell him that. Thank you, sir. After the Marine left, Bob continued his rounds, past the ICU where heroes learned to breathe again, through the rehabilitation wing where warriors learned to walk on prosthetic legs, around the family areas where people learn that love doesn't require perfect bodies. As he walked, Bob reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the corridors of Walter Reed, from eliminating threats in the dark corners of the world to protecting healing in the bright lights of a hospital. He thought about the 3 terrorists he'd neutralized 6 months ago, now serving life sentences in federal prison after providing intelligence that prevented 7 other attacks. He thought about the patients they'd come to kill, who were now walking free because a security guard had been in the right place at the right time. But mostly, he thought about Sarah and the promise he'd made to find peace. He had found it in the most unlikely place. not in retirement from service, but in a different kind of service. Not in forgetting who he used to be, but in using those skills to protect something precious. This story teaches us something important about the nature of heroism and service. Real warriors don't stop being warriors when they hang up their uniforms. They just find new battles to fight, new people to protect, new ways to serve. Bob Harrison could have parlayed his Delta Force background into a lucrative consulting career or high-profile security position. Instead, he chose to spend 12 years walking hospital corridors, checking doors, and making sure people felt safe while they healed. That choice wasn't a step down from his military service. It was the continuation of it. In our society, we often think of heroism in terms of medals and recognition, parades, and public acknowledgement. But the truest heroes are often the invisible ones, the security guards who keep us safe while we sleep, the maintenance workers who keep our infrastructure running, the everyday people who do essential jobs with quiet competence and ask for nothing in return. Sometimes these invisible heroes have extraordinary backgrounds. Sometimes the person checking your ID at the government building used to infiltrate terrorist cells. Sometimes the janitor at your office used to defuse bombs in Iraq. Sometimes the security guard at your hospital used to protect democracy in places where democracy was under attack. They don't talk about it because they don't need to. Their service speaks for itself, even when no one is listening. Bob Harrison protected Walter Reed for 12 years before anyone knew who he really was. He would have continued protecting it for 12 more years if those terrorists had never forced his hand. Because real service isn't about recognition. It's about doing what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, regardless of who notices. Have you ever encountered someone like Bob? Someone whose quiet competence suggested depths you couldn't imagine? Someone who did an ordinary job with extraordinary skill? Share their stories in the comments. Tell us about the invisible heroes in your life, the people who keep your world running safely while asking for nothing in return. And if this story moved you, subscribe to The Human Stories. We're committed to sharing the narratives of quiet courage, hidden heroism, and everyday excellence that make our world a better place. Remember, the most dangerous predators often look like prey, but the most powerful protectors often look like ordinary people. Until next time, pay attention to the invisible ones around you. You might be surprised by what they're capable of,